When chaos strikes, always run toward or away from a human. The alarms blared across the trade hub, red warning lights flashing in every corridor. The chaos had begun just moments ago, yet it already felt like a nightmare unfolding in real time. Interstellar travelers scrambled in every direction, their voices clashing in a desperate cacophony of fear. Amidst the panic, only a few individuals seemed to move with purpose. Humans. Korak, a reptilian merchant from the Zithari Dominion, clutched his shipment records as he ducked behind a metallic crate. His heart pounded in his chest as he surveyed the corridor ahead. The docks were in turmoil. Security forces had lost control. He had heard rumors of human unpredictability, but the sight before him confirmed it. Where others fled in terror, humans charged headfirst toward the danger. A voice cut through the noise like a blade. Get behind something solid. If you can't fight, don't stand in the open. It came from a human, a towering figure clad in a utility jacket, his stance radiating a commanding energy. He had the look of someone who had seen war, and more importantly, survived it. The insignia on his arm marked him as a veteran of Earth's Defense Corps, a force known for its relentless resilience in battle. Korak had seen humans before. A deafening roar filled the corridor as more enforcers stormed in. The fight was far from over, but Rust didn't seem to care. He tapped a comm device on his wrist. "Control, we need an evac on docking bay 6. Now." Static crackled before a female voice responded. "ETA 3 minutes. Hold the line." Rust grinned, an expression that sent a chill through Korak's spine. 3 minutes? More than enough time. A sudden metallic screech filled the air. Korak turned in time to see a massive Sikith brute push through the wreckage. Unlike the foot soldiers, this one was built like a war machine. Heavy plating covered its body, its clawed limbs twitching in anticipation. It locked onto the human squad and let out a guttural hiss. Korak had heard stories about Skith berserkers. Entire planetary militias had fallen to just a handful of them. Rust, however, just sighed and rolled his shoulders. "Oh, you picked the wrong fight today, buddy." The brute lunged. Rust moved in an instant, sidestepping the initial charge and driving his combat knife into the exposed joint of the creature's armor. The alien screeched, swinging wildly, but Rust was already moving, ducking low and sweeping its leg. The thing collapsed. And then, as if things couldn't get any more chaotic, the station-wide intercom crackled to life. "All personnel, be advised. Incoming reinforcements detected. Stand by for impact." Rust's eyes darkened. "Well," he muttered, raising his pistol once more, "guess we're just getting started." The line between survival and extinction. The corridor shook violently as another explosion rocked the station. Sparks rained from broken conduits, and the emergency lighting flickered in and out, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The air was thick with smoke, a mixture of burning metal and the sickly scent of Skith blood. But despite the chaos, the humans did not stop moving. Rust had barely finished putting down the berserker before he was already scanning the corridor for the next threat. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, ejecting the spent magazine from his sidearm and slamming in a fresh one without breaking stride. His expression remained the same, cold, calculated, utterly in control. "ETA," he barked into his comm. The reply came through with static-laced urgency. 2 minutes. Hold tight." Rust exhaled sharply. 2 minutes in a firefight might as well be a lifetime. Korak pressed his back against the metal wall, his claws gripping the edge of a nearby control panel. His breathing was still ragged from the shock of the fight. He had never seen a species fight like this before. Not just with violence, but with purpose. It was as if each movement, each shot fired, was part of a larger strategy. The reptilian merchant had spent years traveling the galaxy, trading between different star systems, observing the way various species handled conflict. The Skith fought with overwhelming numbers and sheer brute force. The Denari relied on precision strikes and superior technology. But humans Humans were different. They fought like they had nothing to lose. They fought like survival itself was a skill they had mastered. A sudden, piercing howl echoed from down the corridor. It wasn't the mechanical clicking of the Sith warriors, nor the static screech of their communication hives. This was something else. Rust's eyes flickered toward the sound. "Reavers," he muttered under his breath. The word meant nothing to Korak, but the way the other humans tensed up told him everything he needed to know. Even those with cybernetic enhancements, hardened warriors with glowing implants and reinforced plating, looked uneasy. A moment later, they appeared. Lanky, twisted biomechanical horrors, all sinewy flesh wrapped in cybernetic enhancements. Their limbs were elongated, their bodies stripped of unnecessary weight, designed purely for speed and carnage. Reavers were not just enemies. They were predators. And right now, they were hunting. Korak's body tensed involuntarily. He had never seen a Reaver in person before, only heard of them in the cautionary tales exchanged between spacefarers in dimly lit trading hubs. Creatures that lived for the thrill of the hunt, engineered from stolen genetic material and infused with alien technology. They weren't part of the Sith army. No, they were something far worse. They were wild cards. "Why are they here?" the cybernetic woman asked, gripping her pulse rifle tighter. Rust didn't answer. He was already moving. "Eyes up. Keep them at range," he ordered, his voice calm, but firm. "Do not let them close the distance." The Reavers moved faster than anything Korak had ever seen. 1 second, they were at the far end of the corridor. The next, they were nearly upon them. And then the fight truly began. Rust raised his pistol and fired 3 times in rapid succession. Each shot connected, punching clean holes through the Reaver's chest, but the thing barely flinched. Instead, it let out a horrible chittering laugh, its black eyes locking onto Rust, with something disturbingly close to glee. It lunged. Rust didn't hesitate. He dropped his gun, ducked low, and rolled forward, bringing up his combat knife just as the Reaver's claws swiped through the air, where his head had been seconds ago. The human twisted, planting the blade deep into the thing's gut, then ripped it sideways, cutting through synthetic muscle and exposed wiring. The Reaver shrieked, its body spasming violently before collapsing. Another took its place immediately. It wasn't just the speed. It wasn't just the violence. It was the way the Reavers enjoyed it. They didn't just kill, they fed off the chaos. Korak pressed himself against the floor, watching in stunned horror as the humans adapted in real time. Where others would panic, they adjusted. When a Reaver dodged gunfire, the humans switched to melee combat without hesitation. When one lunged, they sidestepped, countered, retaliated. Rust had said something earlier. Run toward or away from a human. Now Korak understood why. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Bodies hit the floor. Reavers fell in sickening, twisted heaps, their elongated limbs twitching in death. But the humans weren't unscathed. The cybernetic woman took a claw to the shoulder, sparks erupting from her damaged augments as she stumbled back. Another human had his leg slashed open, barely staying on his feet as blood pooled around his boot. Still, they didn't fall back. They pushed forward. 30 seconds. The voice from the comm crackled in Rust's ear. 30 seconds too long. Korak saw it before the humans did. A Reaver, larger than the others, its entire left side reinforced with thick plates of alien armor, its jaw split open unnaturally wide, revealing rows of cybernetic fangs. It wasn't just another Reaver, it was an Alpha, and it was coming straight for Rust. Korak acted before he could think. His body moved on instinct, years of cautious survival thrown aside. The merchant lunged forward, wrapping his clawed hands around a discarded Skith energy rifle. He barely knew how to fire the damn thing, but right now, he didn't care. The Reaver was nearly upon Rust. Korak roared and pulled the trigger. The energy blast hit the Alpha square in the chest. The impact sent the creature stumbling back, its cybernetic limbs twitching from the overload. It wasn't dead, not yet, but it had bought Rust a second to react. And 1 second was all a human needed. Rust moved like a man possessed, driving his combat knife straight through the Alpha's throat, twisting the blade as dark black ichor splattered across his uniform. The creature thrashed, but Rust didn't let go. He held it down, gritted his teeth, and finished the job. The Alpha let out a final gurgling hiss before its body went still. Silence followed. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of survivors. Then, through the thick smoke and destruction, a ship's landing thrusters roared overhead. The evac had arrived. Rust wiped his knife clean and turned to Korak, studying him for the first time. The reptilian merchant felt his claws trembling, his heart racing. He had fought, not just for himself, but for them. Rust tilted his head slightly, then smirked. "Not bad for a merchant," he muttered, before clapping Korak on the shoulder. "Welcome to the human side of survival." The ramp of the evacuation ship slammed open, and the humans moved forward, ready for the next fight. The cost of survival. The docking bay was in chaos. The AVAC ship hovered just above the metal floor, its thrusters blowing debris in all directions. The ramp was down, and the pilot's voice crackled over the open comms, urging them to board. But nobody was running for the ship just yet, because the fight wasn't over. Rust knew it the second he turned toward the far end of the bay. The Skith weren't retreating. They were regrouping. The insectoid warriors had lost the element of surprise, but they weren't beaten. And now, with the Reavers out of the way, they were moving in formation. Korak had thought the fight was done. The Reavers were the worst of it, right? But now, as he watched the armored ranks of the Sith shift, saw their mandibles clicking in eerie unison, he felt something worse than fear, dread. These weren't just raiders anymore. They were organized. Rust exhaled sharply. Right. So they want to do this the hard way. The cybernetic woman, Evans, Rust had called her, winced as she yanked a piece of shrapnel from her shoulder. Her implants sparked, but she gritted her teeth and lifted her rifle. "You've got a plan, Marine." Rust rolled his shoulders, shaking the blood from his combat knife. "Yeah, we hold them off just long enough to get these people on board." Evans let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "So, suicide." Rust gave her a lopsided grin. "Suicide is when you don't expect to make it out." He checked his ammo. "I expect to make it out." Korak still couldn't understand it. Every species he had encountered had a breaking point, the moment where logic overruled courage, where the instinct for survival took precedence over the will to fight. But humans didn't have one. They didn't just fight to win. They fought because running wasn't an option. The Sith moved as one. Disciplined, precise, efficient. They advanced, weapons raised, their exoskeletal armor clattering with each step. They knew their strength. They outnumbered the humans, they had better weapons, and they had the advantage of strategy. And yet, they hesitated. Korak saw it. The Skith weren't sure. They had the numbers, but the humans had something else. Something terrifying. Rust didn't flinch. He stepped forward, away from the cover, standing in the open. He planted his feet, clenched his fists, and let out a slow, deliberate exhale. Korak felt it before he understood it. The air in the docking bay shifted. The other humans followed Rust's lead, stepping out of cover, standing tall, staring down the Sith warriors. None of them spoke. None of them blinked. And then, Rust smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a threatening smile, even. A daring smile. A smile that knew something the enemy didn't. The Skith stopped. Their formation wavered. And in that moment, the humans attacked. The explosion tore through the center of the Sith ranks, sending bodies flying. Rust had already moved, firing rounds into the chaos before the smoke had even settled. Evans was on his right, gunning down warriors with deadly precision. Another human, a bald man with a jagged scar across his jaw, tackled a skith to the ground, driving a blade between its plates with brutal efficiency. The fight was feral. Korak saw the difference instantly. The skith had numbers, but the humans had momentum. Every shot, every strike, every movement wasn't just about survival, it was about winning. Because that was the real difference. Humans didn't fight to survive. They fought to end the fight. Rust spun, dodging a wild swipe from a skith warrior, twisting under its arm and slamming the barrel of his pistol into the alien's throat before pulling the trigger. The thing gurgled and collapsed. Evans was bleeding, her left arm barely responding, but she was still moving, her mechanical eye locking onto enemy targets with ruthless precision. The bald man had switched to hand-to-hand combat, grappling a skith's arm and tearing it from its socket with pure, unfiltered human aggression. Korak had never seen anything like it, and neither had the skith. The enemy broke formation. One by one, the skith began to fall back. Rust saw it immediately. They're retreating. Push forward. The remaining humans didn't hesitate. They moved as one, driving the skith back toward the far end of the bay. The insectoid warriors weren't used to losing. Korak could see the confusion in their movements, the hesitation, the doubt. Humans were supposed to be weak. They weren't supposed to win. And yet, they were winning. Korak saw it all happen in real time. The way the battle shifted. The way the skith lost their nerve. And then, the bay doors slammed open. A second wave of reinforcements entered. Not skith. Something worse. At first, Korak thought his eyes were failing him. The figures stepping through the smoke were taller, their armor sleek and unnatural, their weapons humming with unfamiliar energy. Rust froze. For the first time, he looked surprised. Evans muttered a curse. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Korak didn't recognize them, but Rust did. Because these weren't just reinforcements. These were the architects, a species so advanced that most of the galaxy considered them legends. A species that didn't get involved in wars. A species that right now was staring straight at Rust and his team. The leader stepped forward. Unlike the skith, it didn't carry a weapon. It didn't need one. Its voice was cold, mechanical, yet disturbingly calm. "Humans," it said, "you were not meant to be here." Rust tilted his head, wiping blood from his face. "Yeah, well," he muttered, "we get that a lot." The architect didn't move, didn't react. Then it raised a hand, and in an instant, everything changed. Korak felt his body seize up, as if his muscles had suddenly turned to stone. His mind screamed at him to move, but his limbs refused. He could see Rust struggling too, his jaw clenched, his hand shaking as he fought against the unseen force. The architects weren't just strong. They were something else entirely. The docking bay fell silent. And then, in a voice as emotionless as before, the architect spoke again. "This war is over," it said, "and you have lost. When the impossible stands before you." Rust had seen a lot in his lifetime. Wars, invasions, even the occasional first contact. But nothing like this. The architects weren't just another alien species. They weren't another empire. Another rival force to be fought and conquered. They were something else entirely. They were a myth. A story passed between soldiers in dimly lit outposts. A whispered warning about an unseen force that only appeared when the universe tipped too far into chaos. The architects didn't fight wars. They ended them. And now, they were here. Rust's entire body refused to move. Every muscle in his frame screamed. Every nerve burned with the unnatural weight pressing down on him. It wasn't pain. Not exactly. It was pressure, like an invisible hand had seized control of every molecule in his body and simply decided. No. Korak struggled too, though his reptilian body trembled against the force in a way Rust didn't. The merchant's eyes were wide, his pupils dilated in sheer primal fear. Whatever this was, his body wasn't built to resist it. None of theirs were. Across the docking bay, The other humans fought against their paralysis. Evan's cybernetic limbs twitched as she pushed back against whatever unseen force held her down, her mechanical eye sparking as if even her augments were rejecting the interference. But it was useless. They weren't just outgunned. They were outmatched on a level that made no sense. The architect leader stepped forward, its body moving with an unnatural grace, as if its feet never fully touched the ground. Its armor, if that's what it was, shifted like liquid metal, pulsing in rhythmic waves that seemed to be in sync with something far beyond Rust's understanding. "Your kind is persistent," it said, in that same calm, emotionless tone. Predictably so. Rust clenched his jaw. His mind screamed at his body to move, to lift his pistol, to take a step forward, to do anything. But he couldn't. Korak, despite his terror, somehow found the strength to speak. His voice wavered, but it was there. "What do you want?" The architect turned its head slightly, almost as if it were studying him. "What we have always wanted," it answered. Correction. Its gaze shifted back to Rust. "You were not meant to be here." Rust had heard that before. Not meant to be here. Not meant to exist in this fight. Not meant to win. The architects had appeared, and now they were making a correction. He had a sinking feeling about what that meant. The architect lifted a hand again. The pressure in the air doubled. The metal flooring of the docking bay groaned under the weight of an invisible force. Korak let out a strangled gasp, his claws digging into his own skin as he fought against whatever was holding them. Evan's augments short-circuited completely. She collapsed, her limbs twitching. The humans were falling. Rust could feel it. Whatever the architects were doing, it was meant to be final. And then, something broke. The force around Rust's body shattered, like 1,000 glass shards exploding outward from his core. The invisible weight disappeared so suddenly that he nearly fell forward. And just like that, he could move again. Not just him. All of them. Evans gasped as she pushed herself back to her feet. The bald man with the scar blinked in shock, flexing his fingers. Korak nearly collapsed from the sudden loss of pressure. Rust's head snapped up, locking eyes with the architect leader. It hadn't done this. Something else had. The architect turned its head slightly, almost curious. And then Rust felt it. A presence. Not in the room, not standing beside him, but somewhere deeper. A vibration in the air. A shift in the very fabric of reality. And for the first time, the architect seemed unsure. A voice, not spoken, but felt, whispered through the air. Not yet. Rust didn't know where it came from. Didn't know who had said it, or how it had cut through the architect's control like a knife through silk. But he didn't hesitate. His muscles burned as he surged forward, lifting his weapon before the architects could react. The first shot slammed into the leader's chest, and to Rust's complete shock, it staggered. Not much. Barely an inch. But it staggered. The second shot tore a hole through the shifting metal. And suddenly, the fight was back on. The humans moved as one. Evans dove sideways, grabbing one of the pulse rifles from a fallen Sith. The bald man let out a battle cry, launching himself forward in pure human defiance. Korak was still in shock, still reeling from whatever had just happened, until Rust grabbed him by the arm and shoved him toward the evac ship. Movie. The architect leader recovered almost instantly. The air trembled again, but this time, Rust knew what it felt like. And he knew how to resist it. His body burned with a sensation he couldn't explain. His blood felt thicker. His limbs felt stronger. The architect lashed out. Rust caught the attack midair. His bare hand closed around the shimmering, shifting appendage. And he didn't break. For the first time, the architect's face shifted slightly. Not quite an expression, more like analyzing confusion. Impossible. Rust grinned. Yeah, we get that a lot. He yanked the architect forward, then slammed a boot into its chest, sending it crashing backward. The human surged past him, piling onto the AVIC ship as covering fire lit up the docking bay. Korak scrambled up the ramp, his mind still struggling to process what had just happened. The last thing he saw before the doors sealed shut was Rust, standing alone against the architects. Then the ship launched. As the thrusters ignited, Korak collapsed onto the floor, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to Evans, his voice barely above a whisper. "What was that?" Evans wiped blood from her mouth. "That," she exhaled. "That was Rust being Rust." Korak shook his head. "No. The voice. The thing that broke us free." Evans hesitated. Then she said the only words that made sense. "I don't know." The ship sped into the void. Behind them, the station was lost to the darkness of space, and Rust was still down there,